Test, test. Jared, can you hear me?
Here he is. Well, that's from the original. And I think we're good. Matt had to step out. He'll be back in a little bit.
Okay.
Crazy. That's 40 and 13. So I think whenever you're ready. Streets on it, yeah.
Well, yeah, when they're ready to record, just let me know.
I'm ready.
You're ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm obviously not there, but so I'll be running the meeting off-site today. Today is Tuesday, November 12th, 2024, and this is the Cottonwood Heights City Council work session. We'll start real quickly with a review of our business meeting. Let me just mention as we get started, we had an item to discuss in a closed session today that got canceled. So we are probably going to have a shorter work session than normal, and we might have a little bit of a break between our business meeting. But we'll get started tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Highland, would you mind leading the pledge tonight?
Sure.
I already asked the chief to do it.
Oh, you did? Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
You're right. Next week.
Yeah.
So we'll have a citizen comment period like always, and we have 5 action items to consider as a council tonight. The first one being item 4.1, consideration of ordinance 423, adopting an amended budget for July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. This is the item that we discussed with Scott last week. Is there any questions or comments from the council? We also had a public hearing last week as well, in which we didn't get any comment. Scott, do you want to add anything? No changes, correct?
I don't have any updates really.
Okay. Any questions? Yeah, any questions or comments from the council? Nope. So great. So we'll vote on that item this evening. The next item up for vote will be consideration of ordinance 424, amending section 19.72.050 of the Cottonwood Heights Code of Ordinances. That's a text amendment, right, on the impervious surfaces, Mike, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And we discussed this item as well. Any questions from the council on this item? Okay, without any questions, we'll move on to item 4.3, which is a consideration of resolution 2024-67, approving an agreement for planning and design services. So I'm going to have Matt Ship tell us a little bit about this item.
Mayor, thank you. Actually, I'm going to turn it over to Ben Nelson, our senior staff engineer, who's going to briefly tell you what it is so you're understanding of what we're happening.
Great.
So this is the an agreement for design purposes with Civil Science to do design for a repair of the storm drains pipe. The pipe is the pipe that runs under Kings Hill Drive and Norton's Decimal Creek. We were made aware earlier in the year that there's some issues with the pipe. We've gone and cambered it and taken a look at it and have found some issues with the pipe. It's compromised in a few places, and so this design purpose is to install a new pipe that will fix that issue and prevent any failure at that specific crossing.
Great.
Any problem when you say compromise? Any dangers, imminent dangers right now, or just something that needs to be addressed?
So if we don't address this, then there's potential that in the future that pipe would collapse, and then that would put property at risk, and the creek is going to run its course, but this will minimize damage to the surrounding properties and take care of it before it becomes an issue.
So I did have a question. The address of the house that's located on the west side of Kings Hill Drive, is it where that culvert comes out into their, I guess, backyard?
Yeah.
And so the rest of the waterway, there was no problems with the culvert underneath Blue Jay Lane or beyond, or?
So this is the map that shows the affected area, so it'll be,
It's okay.
yeah, it'll be, yeah, this is the copy prepared.
In your pocket.
And while we're at it, this pipe is not up to the city standard as well, so this pipe, this whole pipe system will be replaced as part of that design.
The water comes above ground level, just on the other side of Kings Hill Drive, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So I'm just a little bit confused. Isn't this is just a ditch, like it is behind all the other houses. But I just don't understand, is this actually gonna be put underground, what is currently above ground?
So it is currently under, there's a brick landscaping that's there. So it isn't a pipe that goes underneath all of that, and then daylight's at the end of that where the end of that pipe is.
I always thought it daylighted, I guess is the term. Right after it went on the other side of the street. It currently is underground.
Yes.
To help, if I can, to help answer one of the questions, Councilmember Highland, as far as imminent danger, the bottom of the pipe, when we say compromised, is eroded away. It's an old corrugated metal pipe. And a piece of that was replaced about 12 years ago. They only did half of it because it was rotten. It was deteriorated. We're replacing the whole thing with the new standard, well, with our standard pipe. And the wall that's on the west side does have some issues that's starting to drop down. There's water coming up. So there is definitely an issue with the road giving way as well. So we're trying to get ahead of that before the spring runoff. It's just one of those storm drain emergencies that we see and we find, and trying to fix all the old problems. So
You just said something important. So this comes out of the storm drain fund?
yes, it's a storm drain budget, correct. Any other questions we can answer?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item for tonight is item 4.4, consideration of resolution 2024-68, approving disposal of unclaimed property or former evidence. So Chief Russo, we'll turn that one to you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. These are items placed into evidence that are no longer needed and have unidentified owners. They include tools, bikes, electronics and such. They'll be handed over to our auction company, and the proceeds will be returned to the city and requested by the police department in a budget adjustment later on.
Great. Any questions, comments from the council? Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
And then the last item to vote on tonight is a consideration of resolution 2024-69, approving entry into an agreement with Salt Lake County for Tier 2 ZAP funding. We do this every year that we get this funding. Ann's not here, but I think, Jared, anything you want to add to this resolution?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, we actually got $100 more than we did last year from them. So we're actually glad that it remained the same and even with a little bit extra. So this goes towards the summer musical each year, as well as a lot of our events and things, just kind of help supplement that as well. So.
Great. Any questions, comments from the council? Okay, and then we will be approving minutes from a couple different meetings tonight, and that's both the October meetings, the October 15th and 29th, both the work session and business meeting. We'll be approving those minutes this evening.
Just October 15th, Mayor.
Oh, okay, just the 15th?
Yeah.
Okay. Great, thanks. And then that's it for the review of our business meeting. So we'll move on to back to our work session agenda. The first item under staff report is item A, which is a historic committee report. We're grateful to have Jim Kitchis, who's our historical committee chair, and Coral Borchinski, the surveyor, with him. And if they would come up to the table, and they're going to present to us today.
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to share what we've been working on in the Historic Committee this year. We always appreciate the opportunity to present to the city and the City Council. I'm going to try and keep my presentation fairly brief and just give an overview of kind of how 2024 has looked for the committee, some of the things we've done, and then I'll turn it over to Coral so that she can talk about a lot of the great work that she's done for the city and for the committee with a reconnaissance level survey on some of our oldest subdivisions in the city. So with that, we have our slideshow.
I do.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
It doesn't start out. All right, bear with me.
Oh, okay.
Which one's first? Is it this one?
It would be.
I have this one and this one.
Oh, that doesn't. Mine look like this on the front page.
Mine doesn't.
Okay.
Let's keep going.
Okay. Well, I wanted to just start off by giving a little bit of an overview and mission for our committee and some of the efforts we've really put in to engage our committee members this year. I've been fortunate to have a really great committee with really dedicated members who have really put forward a lot of great work this year. Ken Verdoya still is serving as vice chair of the committee, and this year Bruce Lubeck took over as secretary for our committee and has been doing a really good job with that. In addition to vice chair, Ken is also continuing to lead the working group who is focusing in on oral histories, and I'll speak a little bit about that in a minute. We've also had a lot of good work done in historic preservation, and that'll be kind of in what Coral presents. And that's been led by Gail Conger, who's been our longtime working group leader in that effort. Grateful to Jessica Despain, who has served as our Butlerville Days liaison and helped with a lot of the planning in that space. And then this year we did put a focus on communications, and Mark Lentz on our committee has been helping to write the items that go into the city newsletter and really strategizing how we can communicate the history better to the citizens of Cottonwood Heights. So I'm very encouraged with Mark's background that we're going to really make some good progress in that area. We also this year adopted a pattern. Every month we had monthly working sessions here at City Hall where the committee members, if they were available, came in and helped with different projects. And that really did help keep the momentum, I think, moving forward with our committee and keeping them connected instead of just the month-to-month meetings. We're actually able to get our hands on records, work on different exhibits. And so that was a real, I think, good thing for us this year. Next area is just how we're connecting with the committee or with the community and the efforts we're putting forward as a committee to raise awareness about the history of Cottonwood Heights. This year we had our Butlerville Day exhibit, which was on the old mill. That was the exhibit we had in City Hall last fall. We were able to repurpose that, and we had a lot of good foot traffic through there and a lot of good conversations with community members about their memories, their feelings about the old mill. In addition to that, we were also able to continue our historic walks as part of Butlerville Days, which have continued to grow every year. We get more of an audience every year who join Gail and our friends on the Trails Committee and learn as they do historic walks through the city. This fall, we had our exhibit that's still up on the upcoming 20-year anniversary of the city. That will be repurposed in 2025 for Butlerville Days. We're really going to put a lot of focus and emphasis on celebrating 20 years of city history in 2025. An exciting thing that we were able to engage in this year is collaboration with other city groups. A group, sort of new alliance is kind of coalescing that has brought together members of the historic groups from Holiday, Brighton, Sandy, Taylorsville, Farmington, Mill Creek, Draper, and Murray. We had our first meeting in September, and we're kind of all just learning from each other and identifying things that are working in other historic groups. I will say, really after talking to a lot of the groups, really, really happy with where our committee is and the work we're doing. I think we have a lot to learn from others, but they really are looking to us as kind of a leader in this area. And I just also wanted to point out the ongoing discussions and collaborations we're having with our friends up in Brighton. The history that connects Brighton and Cottonwood Heights is very real, and it's been great. Ken and I have been able to go up and do some advising and consulting with the folks up in Brighton, and helping them develop a strategic plan that they can maybe use, digitize some of their records, and they're currently working on a project to do more historic signage down the canyon. So we're always looking for good opportunities to connect and collaborate with them. The next initiative I wanted to just touch on is our oral history projects initiative. One of the big things that we wanted to try and do this year was actively recover work that had been done in 2010 that we thought had probably been lost. Back in 2010, there was an effort to do oral histories with 20 some odd members of the community, and they sort of had just vanished and we weren't able to find them. After digging through our records, we were able to recover 9 of those oral histories and the material that had been collected at the time around those oral histories. And those are now available on our digital archive. So I was very happy that we were able to salvage that work and at least recover 9 of the very, very illuminating community histories, like I said, with longtime members of the community. We also were able to complete a new oral history this year with longtime Cottonwood Heights resident Clayton Green, who connected with us at Butlerville Days. We were able to meet with Clayton and record a video oral history interview with him that will be going up on the digital archives very soon. I wanted to touch very briefly, because this is going to be more in what Coral presents, but on what we're doing with preserving and historical preservation and documentation. The biggest initiative we had this year was the CLG grant that Coral conducted for us that she's going to discuss. Also, obviously, just going to touch on too, the old mill. It's been a big issue. The committee has been receiving a lot of public comment on the future of the old mill. We also had the opportunity to meet with the owners who presented to our committee in August. The committee has been sort of synthesizing everything we heard, and we anticipate finalizing a statement and recommendation at our upcoming meeting tomorrow that we'll pass along to the city once we hold that meeting.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
I thought you had already made a public statement about.
At our last meeting, we did tentatively adopt, but the committee did want to rephrase a couple of things in it so that we finalize tomorrow.
Oh, I got it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no problem. And this year, we were also very proud to be recognized by the Utah Historical Society with their Outstanding Achievement Award. And we appreciate the City Council also recognizing that our committee had received that award. That was for years of efforts on behalf of a lot of committee members, and we're very, very happy that we were able to be recognized with that. As I mentioned, as we're partnering with other community groups and other historic groups throughout the valley and kind of learning where they're at, it's becoming increasingly clear that our committee really is at a very high maturity level in what we're able to do and able to deliver. And we really are striving to keep that and just continue to build on that success and really kind of lead out for other groups who are a lot of them just starting out and kind of getting their feet wet in this area. And we're happy to do that. As far as looking ahead, our 2025 objectives, big one for us is just getting our committee fully staffed. I've had a couple of members who say that they're ready to wind down their years of service. So we're going to be putting in an active effort to do some recruitment and try and find some new members to fill open positions on the committee. We do have a couple of targeted research projects in mind that we would really like to dig into and do some work on. This would include the history of canals and water development in the city, the completion of I-215. That was really a landmark sort of thing in the history of our city. So we want to put some effort into that. And then the history of the Hillside Plaza area and how that was developed and things related to that. The big push for us is obviously going to be the year-long celebration of the city's 20th anniversary as an incorporated city. So that's going to include getting newsletter content out, adding additions of actual primary source material into the digital archives of how decisions were made, conversations that were had, so that that's just on the ready and people can see that history live on the digital archive. And then our Butlerville Day exhibit will be focused on this, the 20th anniversary of the city. And really the digital archives for us has become sort of the hub for how we're really doing everything. All the work that we're doing with the oral histories, our historic preservation, is really flowing into that digital archives. And a couple of other value added things I wanted to mention with our digital archives, and some things that we were able to add this year. We now have city council minutes and agendas going all the way back to 2005 up to present as a backed up redundant copy in that digital archive. So the city can feel assured that there's a backed up digitally preserved copy in the archive. We also have all the city newsletters going as far back as the city newsletter has gone back. Yeah, the other things I mentioned, the oral histories and the historic preservation work. So we're going to continue to just try to put in the best work we can. And so that's what I had. I'm going to turn the remaining time for this presentation over to Coral to walk us through and share the information on the reconnaissance level survey work she did on the historic subdivisions in our city. So Coral.
Hey, Jim, do you mind if I, just before we go to Coral, and
Sure.
thank you for that presentation. I appreciate it. I want you to know how much we appreciate what you do and your committee. You also last year did a lot of work in regards to creating a veterans memorial. And,
Yes.
and I wanted to know, or let the council know, that in the next 2 or 3 months, that's an agenda item that we will be discussing, all of the work that you came forward to recommend and some of the ideas that you had. And so I just wanted to mention how appreciative we were for that work, and that will be like I said, an agenda item here soon. So
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Jim and Coral.
Thank you. My name is Coral Bersinski. I'm an architectural historian and preservation consultant. And I've completed a reconnaissance level survey this past year. And next slide, please.
Yes, sorry.
So the map on the left was from a reconnaissance level survey that I did in 2016 called Selective Survey. That we went and I looked for all the historic buildings that were before 1953. And they were spread out through all the community, those yellow dots you see. One of the recommendations from this survey was to take a look at historic subdivisions in the city, because the first subdivision was platted in 1953. And so your committee got a CLG, Certified Local Government Grant, to do 4 neighborhoods. And that's on the map. And they're sort of kind of in the center of the city. Next slide, please. So you may ask, why do you need an inventory or a survey of historic subdivisions? Well, we're looking for potential National Register of Historic Places, historic districts. And that becomes important to property owners, because if they are a contributing building in a historic district or eligible for the National Register and Historic District, they could get tax credits to renovate their homes from the tax credit program. And it's a good way to recognize the history of the city. So just to go over some general National Register criteria, the National Register usually considers properties 50 years old or older. So 1950 subdivisions now qualify. To have good historic integrity, that means, do they look very similar to how they looked in the historic period? And also, are they significant in one or more areas? For historic subdivisions, historic districts, usually association with patterns of history, criterion A in the National Register, such as in the area of community planning and development. They could also be eligible under criterion C, which is architectural significance. Now, there are some houses in these subdivisions that predate the subdivision. For example, the Badger home, which is probably eligible as an individual property. But this particular survey was looking at neighborhoods as a whole. And when a ranch house that looks like hundreds of other ranch houses becomes important, as it contributes to the historic integrity of a neighborhood. What we're looking for in historic districts is a good ratio of eligible contributing properties versus ineligible non-contributing properties. Those are older properties that have been renovated. So they're starting to look like new houses. They don't have their historic integrity for the period of significance. And also out of period properties are non-contributing. Those are built outside the period of significance for the district. And we also like to see districts have somewhat distinct boundaries. So you really, when you take a walk or drive into a particular neighborhood, you really feel that it's a cohesive neighborhood.
May I ask a question? I find this really fascinating. So if it's 50 years as the threshold, like a lot of the houses in the neighborhood I live in were built in, like mine, 1972. Well, that's more than 50 years from 2024.
Yes, those are also eligible. And
So-
in fact, they can be. And it depends on how the National Register nomination is written. So a period of significance. So they could go to that 1970 for, you know, cutoff date, or they could, you know, make it a little bit a shorter period. Sometimes for a single house that's architecturally significant, it'll be just the year it was built is its period of significance.
And so even if it doesn't fall into one of these subdivisions that have been identified by our historic committee, an individual can go after this National Registry
Yes,
designation.
yes. If it appears to meet the criteria.
And part of I heard you say part of the motivation is that then there are tax credits available to preserve then the home.
Yeah, to rehabilitate. So anything that, you know, a new roof, a new HVAC, the preserving the old windows, those kinds of things would be eligible for tax
And
credits.
does it have to have some significant, like auspicious previous owner or elements like that?
There are
That can
several
help?
ways to do it, yeah. So,
Thank you.
so
for
we're
letting
looking
me-
for
that's
specifically looking at
fascinating.
subdivisions.
Yeah.
So I think you'll get a good idea of what I'm talking about in the presentation. Now, the four neighborhoods that were chosen were Cottonwood Ridge, and that's the plat date there. The Cottonwood Heights area is actually 3 subdivisions that sort of blend into each other. They're straight streets that kind of go from one to another. And so those were done as one neighborhood. Stephenson Heights and the Greenfield Village, which actually had 8 phases. And so then you can see on the map where those are located. So let's start with Cottonwood Ridge subdivision. It was the smallest one and one of the earliest ones in 1953. It's located at Fort Union Boulevard and Virginia Hills Drive. And it's relatively small with only 34 lots. The historic period basically goes to 1953 to 1965. Was one of the last historic ones. The boundaries are pretty distinctive. There's open space, the church, a park, and then another subdivision, but later, and that's not historic. So it does kind of have a distinct feel to it for just one street. So this is another kind of map that was generated from the report. The dark black ones are eligible contributing. The hatched ones are the historic buildings that have been altered, non-contributing, and the open squares are out of period buildings. And as you can see from this, the ratio of eligible contributing to non-contributing is only 35%. The non-contributing ones outnumber the eligible buildings. And so the recommendation was this would not make a good, is not eligible as a historic district. And my feeling was walking through the neighborhood and taking photographs. And here's some examples, the next slide. Was that because of that ridge and there's a beautiful view of the valley from the backyards of these houses. And so I can see why several people have been building up. So they have a second story, take advantage of the views. It was definitely doomed by the ridge to not stay the same as it did in the 1950s. And so the recommendation for this particular subdivision was no. Now, Cottonwood Heights Numbers 1 and 2 with Johnson subdivision 3 and 4 and the Bradford Rancho subdivision. Located between Fort Union, 2025 East, 3080 East, and 7375 South. This is with the 3 different subdivisions and a couple of different phases, total of 322 lots. And the historic period might be between 1953 to 1964. They're fairly distinct boundaries to the north, south, east, and east. However, the west boundary to 2700 East also has historic subdivisions and more the next phases of Cottonwood Heights. So these subdivisions are just a little bit later, but they would qualify, as you say, maybe up to 1976. Obviously, but the budget for the project, we couldn't look at subdivisions that much later. And so my recommendation for this subdivision, actually, and it has a ratio of 74%, which is not bad. And you can kind of see as you look at the map. Next slide. Next one. Okay, next one. There, that's now one more. Sorry, I wasn't following. Okay.
So sorry.
So you can see kind of the north half, there's a lot of contributing homes. South half, less so. And that's primarily because there are more brick homes. Brick homes tend to not get covered with aluminum siding as easily as the frame houses do. And so there are more frame houses in the southern half. However, if you were to continue to do some more survey work, that takes it over to 2700 East, you might be able to raise that ratio a little bit.
Can you just explain, I see that both non-contributing and contributing are in purple. Is that a typo or am I misunderstanding?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's just a bullet color. I didn't mean, that doesn't reference the.
So are all of these lavender ones, are these all eligible or ineligible?
No, the colors on the map there is when I have more than one phase, I use this. I have another completely black and white map. I did them more zoomed in so I could get the addresses. So no, the eligibility is only demonstrated by the black, where it's black, hatched, or open. And the colors, I wanted to keep an idea of where the different subdivision boundaries were. Does that make sense?
So the black hash is what?
Okay, the black ones that are completely filled in black, eligible contributing. The ones that are hatched are non-contributing, and then the open ones are out of period.
And again, the non-contributing is because they've been modified.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
And one other thing that intrigued me about this subdivision when I was doing the history, that's in my written report, is that there are newspaper references to a Cottonwood Heights subdivision before 1953, before Cottonwood Heights was actually platted and built. And so I didn't know what that meant, but I think it refers to some of this development that was along 2700 East. So my recommendation, next slide, please, for this neighborhood was a maybe. And my recommendation in the report was to continue doing more survey to survey those adjacent neighborhoods to 2700 East, which it makes a distinct boundary. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the Stephenson Heights subdivision. Bengal Boulevard and, oh, I have a typo. I didn't put in the other streets there. So ignore that. It's just sort of east of your community center, recreation center. It's a little bit bigger at 96 lots, 1953, 1957. And one of the remarkable things about this is there are no out of period. So the historic period is cut off, very distinctive. And it's pretty distinctive on the 4 boundaries with this curving layout that follows the topography of the neighborhood. Next slide, please. So the ratio was 84% eligible contributing, which is a very good ratio for a historic district. And it's primarily brick buildings, which accounts for the, which the preservation much easier to do with a brick building. And it's very interesting as many of the building designs are informed by the topography, like you have a lot of below grade garages. Here's some examples of both eligible buildings and one ineligible building. The next slide, please. And so the recommendation for this, for Stephenson Heights, is that yes, it would make a very good historic district. So for both of the reasons, so good recommendation for this one. Okay, next slide, please. The largest subdivision we looked at was Greenfield Village with 8 phases, and these are shown with the colors on the map. And located between Fort Union Boulevard, good boundary, Highland Drive, good boundary, I-215 in the East Jordan Canal, good boundary, and the Mount View Park, which is where the Mountain View Elementary School was, which I discovered was originally supposed to be called the Greenfield Village Elementary, but they changed it. So 365 total lots in the phases. Historic district from approximately 1953, 1963 in distinct boundaries. So the ratio is of contributing, non-contributing is 73%, so a little bit lower than Stephenson. That is mostly because of the frame buildings. And there's also been some just tear downs and built new buildings, but 24 out of period buildings. But it is very interesting subdivision because it's so big and it's this interesting fan shaped layout that really works with the land there. And next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, and here are some examples of some contributing buildings. Next slide. And a few more ineligible, what that would look like, and then out of period brand new homes built on some of the lots. So the recommendation for historic district was Greenfield Village, was also a yes, thought it had good potential. It also is very interesting. Next slide, please. This is a bird's eye view of the subdivision in 1957 while it was being built. And there are actually several newspaper articles about Greenfield Village. And that had a few parade of homes in it. And so there's documentation history that it was an important part of the growth of Cottonwood Heights. And so it would also make a good historic district for that reason. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
May I just make?
So, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Ellen.
Well,
Councilmember Burrell.
Thank you, Mayor. I had just whispered to our UFA chief here that the baby boomers in these periods were my generation. And the very last slide you put up saying this picture was my birthday, March 31st, 1957. So I thought that was so funny that I whispered, and then you put up the baby boomer, I'm the poster child of a baby boomer. So this was a fascinating presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. So let me ask a question to either Jim or Coral. So if the council were to move forward with a historic district designation for one of these subdivisions, what would that mean in real terms? What does that entail? Give us some examples of why we would want to do something like that.
You want me to take that?
Sure.
Okay. So typically, I have done historic subdivisions in Murray and a couple of other places. What we're looking for is National Register recognition People who live in those neighborhoods and have contributing buildings could have those little plaques on them, just like the big fancy houses in the avenues have plaques. And they could get tax credits for rehabilitating their historic buildings. And when I say rehabilitating, the tax credit program does place some restrictions on what they can do. They can't add that second story, to get a better view. But really, for anybody who wants to preserve the character of their 1950s ranch house, they could do it with these tax credits. But they do have to be individually listed on the National Register soon after the rehabilitation or before, or within a historic district. And most communities, when they do this, they follow up a reconnaissance level survey. With the next grant cycle, they might use the grant money to do this National Register nomination. Now, it's good to have a way to communicate with your property owners, because if the majority of property owners object to a historic district, then it cannot be listed. But most property owners, once they are educated that it's not restrictive, I mentioned the avenues. So like Salt Lake City put local ordinances on the avenues neighborhood. It's not the National Register, it's Salt Lake City's local ordinances. Cottonwood Heights, I do not believe, has any plans to do local ordinances for these historic subdivisions. So they would need to be educated that there would be no restrictions. It could be listed contributing and they could tear it down. And it would just be removed from the list of contributing buildings. And once people know that, when people are educated about the tax credit program, they usually are pretty enthusiastic about a National Register district.
So if someone were to if a homeowner applied and got the recognition, and then they went to sell their home, and the new owner did not want to comply with the National Registry, did I hear you say they can request to be taken off that registry so they could modify their home?
Yeah, there's no restrictions with the National Register listing. It's only honorific. So they could do whatever your building department, gives them a permit to do.
But wouldn't they then lose the designation?
Yes.
Yes.
And that would, for example, if typically the State Preservation Office likes to see areas resurveyed after 10 or 15 years, probably nothing would happen until that, 10-year review, it's resurveyed and like, oh, that one got modified, or oh, that one got torn down, and they would be reevaluated at that time. But yeah, the National Register does not have any restrictions.
So the funds actually for the rehabilitation of a given home come from a federal, it's a national organization. It's not, okay, so it's not regulated, as you just said, by the state. This is registry that we are considering.
If they want to do the tax credits, though, they have a few hoops to jump through, but they'll work with them to help them be able to get do it right to claim the tax credits.
So I think just for the State Historic Preservation Office is really our sort of conduit into all of this world. If we were to pursue anything, we'd be working with the State Historic Preservation Office, which is in Department of Community and Culture, as sort of the liaison. They've helped facilitate the designations of buildings in the city that have gone onto the historic register. They're the organization who's responsible for it.
And so to the mayor's question, is there an expense to the city to proceed for subdivision designation?
Well, if the grant program is a matching funds, so that would be the only expense to get to match the funds for the certified local government grants, if you go that way.
So I imagine it would play out probably with our committee making a recommendation to the city, and then saying we would go after grant funding through our CLG status, and then making a determination of whether that would be matched or not by the city.
All right. So Mike Johnson with Community and Economic Development, any thoughts on your end or concerns?
No, it sounds like there are good parameters for you know, it's a designation that doesn't, it's a little different than our historic preservation ordinance today in that it would not prohibit remodels or renovations or demolitions. It just affects their ability to get certain tax credits. So I don't hear any major concerns.
Okay. Great.
Well, one of the things I am perceiving, if I'm understanding this correctly, is this seems to me that it would align with our sustainability goals. You know, as the city has stated that we're interested in protecting biodiversity. I mean, which smaller is always better. I mean, you know, the size of these homes that were built in the 1950s were significantly different than the, you know, large homes that are built today. And so to incentivize in any way residents to take pride in the size and character that arguably was perhaps better for the environment, you know, 60 years ago, could be a real positive. I think it's also aesthetically a positive to preserve the character of our city by taking pride in these neighborhoods that, you know, date back to these eras and would be eligible for rehabilitation. Those seem to be really positive for overall for our city.
Yeah. I would agree. So I think we would probably look to the historic committee for their recommendations and appreciate you, Jim and Coral, coming to educate us on this. I think this is awesome to learn about. Any other questions or comments from the council?
Well, I would again just like to say how thrilled I am with the historical committee under Jim Keachus and with Gail Conger, and now I've met Coral. You know, I understand you were contracted to do this work, and it's just extraordinary. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. So we will move on to item B under staff reports, which is labeled as a short-term rental discussion. So we're gonna start with our Community and Economic Development Director, Mike Johnson, and then we'll lead into Councilmember Highland. But Mike, we'll turn it to you right now.
Thanks. I have about a minute of preamble here, and then we'll turn it over for discussion. Just a few updates in your packet. I did provide some just initial research. Our staff has met with staff from Sandy, Mill Creek, and Brighton Township. So you can see that spreadsheet in your packet. I'm happy to pull that up if that would be helpful to your discussion. The other part of this is we are moving forward with a fee increase. Increasing that to $650 per first violation, and then a higher penalty for the second violation. That has to go through Planning Commission first, and that's scheduled to be introduced to them in December. And then it'll be back to the council for final consideration. If not in mid-December, then in an early January meeting.
Did we end, Mike, on per occurrence or per night for that fine?
Well, it's still being drafted. Let me.
Each day of violations.
Each day of violation
Separate violation.
is a separate
Okay.
occurrence. Yeah.
So somebody rents for a week, and that we could find the land or the property owner $650 a day, $650 times 7, basically.
We're proposing an escalating fine structure. It would be $650 for the first occurrence, $800 for the second occurrence, and then $1,000 for the third and subsequent occurrences.
Okay.
So is an occurrence a
day.
day or a
One
full
day.
rental
A day.
period?
One
Per
day.
day. An occurrence is per day.
Got it.
So, thank
That is a viable detriment to me. Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Highland. Go ahead.
Well, I appreciate the effort there because I think that shows our citizens that we're trying to do something and really recognizing that it doesn't make sense for us to invest a lot of resources in enforcement if there's not some teeth behind it. So I'm grateful for that. So that was when I proposed that we do something with short-term rentals. That was the first item that I suggested. And then there were 3 other items that were proposed. And pull that up.
Well, you're pulling that up. I guess I just need a point of clarification because in paragraph 4 under project here in my packet, it actually says recommending a 650 daily fine for first time violations and 800 daily fine for repeat violations. So that doesn't seem to jive with what was just described.
Yeah, again, it hasn't been introduced to the planning commission yet. The idea is it will escalate per day. So the final language is not drafted at this point. That'll be drafted
But
by.
repeat is not, I mean, that's quite different than what we just.
I would-
Each day is a separate violation.
Yeah.
If we define the violation as each day.
The code
Yeah, I
will,
know, but if I read the sentence, you'll see that this doesn't,
the code will say what Shane said.
so this,
My summary may be inaccurate, or I may have paraphrased that incorrectly. Shane's drafting that legislation. That's what we'll.
so we have that in writing in any of
Again,
our-
no, it's not been drafted into an ordinance yet, because that has to go to planning commission in December.
And then it'll come back. to
And then
us.
it'll come back to the council after it goes through planning commission.
Okay.
So the second thing is to have the city council set priority objectives. And last meeting, I handed you a paper that was from, it was a white paper from Granicus that suggested some policies and objectives that we consider. I want to table that for just a second and go forward to the next, which we had talked about creating a subcommittee to recommend policy, compliance procedures and penalties for non-compliance. And we know that this is on, the radar of the legislature now. Ken Gardner Institute just completed their review of short-term rentals in the state, made some recommendations. And so I see the subcommittee really taking on the work of thinking about what we will do based on what the legislature does. If the legislature does increase our ability to enforce, we would be able to suggest one set of policies, and if they don't, then we still have to go down this road with the not well rule still in place. But the whole objective is to be prepared with something by the time the end of the legislative session occurs in March. So that committee has been set. The council member on that committee is me. The planning commission, it was chosen that we would have Lucy Anderson and Sean Steinman represented because they are the chair and the vice chair of the planning commission. From community and economic development would be Mike Johnson, and I really applaud all of the research that you've done, that you've brought to the council, so thank you for that. And then the last member, at least now, would be from code enforcement, and Chief Russo suggested that be Lieutenant Scott Ricks. And they can certainly guide us on what they're able to do. I'm following closely what some of the other cities around us are doing. I think we're all struggling with this. We all have struggled with this. And the whole point of this is to increase, compliance, and most short-term rentals are probably conducted in a safe, non-threatening manner, but we just have those problems that we need to address for our citizens. Before I get back to the setting the council, the priority objectives, we also had talked about informing our lobbyists, or having our lobbyists rather inform our representatives of really how we're being affected. And the disappointment I have in the Ken Gardner Institute report is that it kind of clumped Salt Lake County all in one. So it didn't really set aside I think the east side cities that are more highly impacted by short-term rentals than maybe the west.
The only connection I think they gave was identifying areas of tourism focus, which I think it would be us.
Yeah.
No question. But yeah, it didn't spell it out specifically. But
I mean, it did look at Salt Lake City, it did look at Brighton, and maybe it's just they were included in the report because they made the top 10 list of the percentage of residences that were short-term rentals. And we were like barely outside of that top 10. I think the cutoff was 513, and based on what Deckard told us last year, we're at about 500. That's legal and illegal. And so we are impacted. So Jared sent out today the Granicus white paper that had some suggestions for policy objectives. And before I do a deep dive into this, have you had a chance to look at that, to think about what our priorities would be?
well, since this was only supplied to me in the less than 24 hours, I had surgery this morning. I have not had a chance to review that.
And I know that I had sent it out earlier to the mayor and to Councilmember Burrell, but I'm not sure that Councilmember Holton or Newell were able to look at it. So since that's the case, I don't think it would be productive for us right now to start thinking about priority objectives. But one of the things that's very clear, and I just think this is probably in anything that we do, is that our actions need to meet our objectives. And so I don't feel like the subcommittee can really do good work without the priority objectives from the council. So Jared, would you suggest that we table this until the next meeting?
Yeah, that's, we want to do that. I think there's room.
So
I think that's really short tonight.
I think that's fair to, but I think we could still at least talk a little bit, Councilmember Highland. At least, you know, to be honest with you, I would love for you to start with your opinion on that subject. You know, and I know you've gotten in and done a bunch of work and are really well versed in this subject now. So tell us your thoughts of what you think, you know, a priority should be for the council.
Well, I think underlying all of this, of course, is we want to be able to somehow manage the nuisances that come with short-term rentals, party houses, parking problems, and then also at the same time reward those who are running good short-term rentals that are supplementing their income. For example, we had someone who came to the business council meeting and said, look, this is a way that I can actually afford to live here. And so I think the primary thing that we're going to wrestle with is whether or not we're going to expand the range where short-term rentals can be licensed in Cottonwood Heights. Right now, it's limited to the multifamily areas. Would we consider that owner-occupied short-term rentals be a part? Kim Gardner, I think what I really read into that report is short-term rentals are not going to go away. And so the white paper had suggested, for example, the cities who would try to completely ban them, just incentivize noncompliance. And it's my opinion right now that what we're doing is incentivizing noncompliance, and that's based on the evidence that we have 400 illegal rentals that are operating in our city. So what we're going to really have to wrestle with is that owner-occupied. I don't know how the council feels about it right now.
May I ask a point?
So, oh yeah, oh go ahead.
On this
Councilmember.
table, oh, thank you, Mayor. On this table that you provided, is this for S1 properties? Because if it's a condominium, like in all of our zoning only allows it in condominiums, so they would all be non-owner occupied. So I don't understand when I read this, Mill Creek, yes, Sandy, yes.
Yeah.
Brighton, no.
So Mill Creek and Sandy allow them in, it's not clear in that table, so it's a good question, in single family zones.
So
Cottonwood Heights is not on that table because our ordinance is very restrictive. We just prohibit them if you're on a public street, and if you're in a single family zone, it's just prohibited.
So what about with Brighton?
Brighton's not an owner occupancy requirement. I don't know if they have zoning, it has to be in certain zones or not, but there is not an owner occupancy requirement in Brighton.
And 27.8% of Brighton residences are short-term rentals, according to the Kim Gardner report.
I'm sorry, what percentage?
27.8%.
But we don't know whether they have zones for those short-term rentals in Brighton.
We can find out. It's not in that table. We're happy to check into that. Mill Creek and Sandy limit them in other ways. I think Sandy allows a certain amount in various planning areas. Is that right?
So Sandy has 30 geographic communities. They allow 2 per community plus 1 per whatever the population count or the housing count is in that community.
Yeah, so they don't limit by zone, but they limit by
Neighborhoods.
number in geographic
Community
areas.
neighborhoods.
I think Mill Creek has something similar as well.
Yeah, Mill Creek, I think they wouldn't allow another short-term rental within a couple of 400 feet of another.
Yeah.
That's how they approached it. So also.
So
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Councilmember. I was just going to say, I've been thinking about what you provided and coming up with things and you know, we had a resident come, I don't know, a couple meetings ago maybe, and talked about, hey, I would really appreciate the council considering owner occupied short-term rentals. And, you know, as I've tried to think about this in a manner that is fair to people, and I just wanted to throw this out as maybe a talking point, maybe we want to disregard it quickly, but you know, to me, when we're designating an area, I think we ought to have a process for someone to file a request to become an approved short-term rental area. And the thing that would convince me is if a fairly high percentage of their neighbors agreed. And so if we set a threshold at a certain percentage, and like I said, I think it would need to be pretty high, and maybe that would make it harder, but at least people in the application process would understand, look, you've got to get your neighbors to agree. And if they consider it a nuisance, then to me, it's a nuisance. And so there could be areas where maybe there's more renters and they wouldn't mind, and if with that designation, and I don't know, Shane and or Mike, if there would be any issues with that type of an ordinance designating an area with a certain owner occupancy or certain percentage of residents agreeing to move forward with it. But that was one way that I thought would at least create some type of fairness.
Mayor, are you speaking only of owner occupied?
Yes.
Okay.
And are you talking about just the people that reside on the households on either side of a given property, or are you talking about?
No, a bigger area. I think it's got to be streets. I don't know. And that would be something that we would have to come up with. We'd have to maybe it's their street and any street touching their street. I don't know. But I think we could come up with something. But anyway, yeah.
I mean, I do like that what you suggested in your memo is that we have a public hearing, that we have an open house or something to get some feedback on this. Mayor, I don't know if some other municipalities have tried that approach. I think it would be on the subcommittee to try to, look at that.
Yeah.
It's something we have to wrestle with. And that's the whole point of this conversation. I don't think that there's a black and white answer to this. And when we come back, the reason I provided this Granicus paper is it actually has these examples where it goes through and said, okay, if you're an affluent residential community in an attractive location, these might be some of your objectives. Or if you're a working class suburban community with a lot of housing availability and a struggling downtown, you might look at this differently. And one of the things it says, ensure that traditional residential neighborhoods are not turned into tourist areas to the detriment of longtime residents. I think we would all agree that that's exactly what we're looking for.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, we have an affordability problem. And we also have a desire to capture tourist revenue and tax revenue in particular, because we are an affluent residential community in an attractive location. So I would like us to come back and really wrestle with that, talk about it so that the committee doesn't spin its wheels and spend a lot of time making policy recommendations that then aren't going to match what the council would like to see.
When I studied this a few years ago and was looking at Sandy and how Sandy City has done it, one of the things that they admitted right on their website was that, there was a very small percentage of short-term rental owners that were complying with obtaining a business license.
Yes.
I don't see this addressed in this comparison, but does Mill Creek, Sandy, and Brighton all require a business license? And if so, what's the compliancy rate?
I know Brighton does. I believe they all do.
Brighton does.
Yeah.
And Sandy is revisiting theirs. And one of the things that they're looking at is employing an administrative law judge, because these things in the courts are just, they're getting thrown out or to the side because there's more important things. I just learned recently that administrative law judge doesn't necessarily have to have a law degree. That, we should look at this a little bit differently with enforcement. So that's why I want to do this in tandem with the hope that the legislature will also revisit this, because I think St. George is pulling their hair out, with the problem for short-term rentals. We're not the only community, and I find that this is the prime time for us to do this. Instead of just ignoring the fact that we have 400 non-compliant short-term rentals in our city.
I think that's the first issue. It's making sure we get compliance across the board. And creating policy that does that. Then work through the rest of them.
And I think that's a really important metric that we should focus on is increasing compliance. Councilmember Holton, you're gonna be able to tell us a lot more about what's happening in the legislature because there's this, wasn't there a grant to be able to try to identify these so that we actually can capture the tax revenue appropriately?
Yeah, so that's, the tax commission is going to be choosing a vendor probably in the next 3 weeks or so. I don't think, sadly, I don't know if the data will be done by the time the session starts. That'd be super helpful to know how many people are non-compliant, because some of this data that they're using, right, I do question how accurate that is. And as much as I'd love to say, I'd love for our city to know what the actual numbers are so we know what we're working with, but I don't think that we'll be able to do that in time. But I do think just, I go back and forth. Do we need to know how big of a problem it is? Or do we just create policy that we think is responsible, good policy that's we all feel comfortable about in our community? And it's so funny because I do go back and forth. I think 9 times out of 10, I think, look, this isn't zoned for short-term rental. And then you do hear those stories and we're all susceptible to those people that are, my area. I don't know if you know the nickname for my neighborhood. Mike Shelton has that side I told you about. There's actually a lot of people that I would knock on their doors and they did talk to me about, some of them do use short-term rentals to supplement their income. But then I also go back to the fact of, but you're not prevented from having a long-term rental.
That's true, by state statute.
So this is more of a question of not, can you supplement your income? It's in what way, shape, form, fashion are you doing it?
Well,
I think we probably all would agree that most of the time we would prefer to have someone that's renting that is a long-standing resident that's part of the community.
I agree with you. I think there's some best practices that are evolving in this industry, obviously, because if you're operating a short-term rental, you don't want your neighbors to be calling you out all the time because you're creating nuisances. That just creates bigger problems. And one of the things I really keyed in for this gentleman who spoke at the council meeting is he said, look, I've had long-term and short-term rentals. And let's talk about the economics first. He said, I can rent my place for 3 months and then I don't have to hassle with a renter for 12 months. But it's also true that my short-term renters they do far less damage than my long-term renters because they just come in, they're not moving furniture in and out. So as far as the maintenance of my property and what I can have in my control and how that, improves my individual life, he preferred the short-term rental situation for many more reasons than just monetary. And Councilmember Burrell, if I could share a little bit, you said you had a long-term renter in your basement.
Yeah, I've done both. I mean, during the 2002 Olympics, we had short-term rentals. And then in subsequent years, we did a little bit more of that because we became empty nesters in 2001. And then more recently, when we were out of the country for long periods of time, we had the long-term renters, and then we moved back into our upstairs and had the long-term renters we tried to get rid of them after, frankly, 4 months, and they begged us, and they were the most lovely people in the world. Give us another 6 months, give it, and your heart goes out, and there's a lot to it. So and there's the noise transfer. None of these houses are built to absorb the noise transfer. So I can tell you, there's issues beyond, and I appreciate Councilmember Highland, getting into some level of detail. Because if you've never done it yourself, it's hard to imagine, and it's easy to say, oh, well, let's just stay with the long term. And it's not that I'm particularly want to see everybody go to short term, but I am very sympathetic to those who see the value of short-term rentals, just impacting their life for 3 months instead of 12 months out of the year in and year out, or as you said, the damage that can happen with furniture being moved in and moved out.
It's even half a day when you're talking about noise transfer, because most of the time people who are visiting here are usually out during the day, maybe even in the evenings. My 2 children have long-term renters in their basement, and the noise transfer is constant. And they can't wait till they don't have to have long-term renters so they can just, go ahead.
So one other, I don't mean to change the course of this, and I want to really thank Mike Johnson for putting together this table. I also think that another city we could learn from, while they're not right in our neck of the woods, Newport Beach, California has not only a great noise ordinance, frankly, that I plan to ask our city to think more about our own noise ordinance, but they have a really thorough STR program. And they have, they come right out and say that partying, and exactly how they define it, but they indicate partying as a no-go
Right.
related to STRs.
Right.
So I think there are ways, of course, one of the other things that's different is their greatest expenditure in a given calendar year is for their police department. And so we're talking, we need some ability to enforce these things. If we're gonna say something like no partying, we better have a budget for officers to be able to go and, in fact, break up those,
I have had a couple root beer kegs at my house.
you will be in big
I was
trouble.
upside down.
Of course, you could say no short-term rental here, I'm just a little party guy.
Root beer?
Well, I think this is what the work of the committee will be, is to look at best practices and look at what's done in other places. Brighton's been successful because they have software that can capture a compliance problem. And I think they have 3 strikes, you're out.
Yeah,
If
I
you
love
have
that,
3
yeah.
nuisances, you are out for a year. You cannot rent anymore. So that provides another incentive for the owner to be responsible. And I'm a little bit biased right now towards, we should allow this in our amazing community because of what it will do for the residents who are struggling to live here and because of our proximity to the canyons. But it has to 100% be done in a way that minimizes the nuisances that people tend to, I think, maybe amplify. I think it's probably 1.5% to 2% of the problems come, from those very few. And then everybody else they're under the radar. I mean, that's why you don't hear about it other than maybe the 2 or 3 houses in Cottonwood Heights that are a real problem.
Right, I would like to make one other comment on, I don't know if you're calling it an ad hoc committee or a citizen committee. But I think it's a great group of people that you've identified thus far. I'd like to suggest, I really believe so strongly in the empowerment of our citizens and bringing their voice to these kind of discussions. So I would even though we have Lucy Anderson and Sean Steinman on that committee, I would like to suggest that perhaps a couple of these people that have come to the microphone, making their plea, be invited to sit at the table during these discussions to bring additional citizen point of view in, beyond bringing in 2 people from the planning commission and other staff and council. Do you see a value in that?
I see a potential bias in that, and that's why we tried to create the committee. And it may appear that I'm biased towards I'm certainly very open to what this could look like. My bias is we have to address the problem. We can't sit on our hands anymore.
Yeah,
so
and I understand that you're planning to have this go, open up to the public for comment. One of the
And to
things,
bring them in as needed. And that's what I was going to finish and say, as needed. Yes, we can bring them in and get their perspectives and their point of view. Making them a permanent part of the subcommittee. I'd have to think about that. I know teams greater than 7 are not effective. There's a ton of research that backs that up. So the smaller, 5-member team.
maybe I don't understand, how long would this committee, would this stay intact even after? So we're talking about a limited period.
Yeah, I don't envision that at all.
Yeah.
I think it's just to get us to a point where at the end of the legislative session, we can make some clear policy recommendations to the council.
I think it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree with Councilmember Hyden. I think you need people that haven't made up their mind, but I do see the value in Councilmember Burrell's statement in bringing people to that committee with their opinions of why or why not they think it would be a great deal. So, but I agree with that.
And I think there's a real difference between coming to a microphone and giving your 3-minute public comment and actually being able to discuss something at a table without those limitations on time, that dynamic. And I don't see why both sides, I'm not trying to make this a bias thing. But I just think the more we can have citizens come to the table and be able to be in these discussions, the better off it is for all of us.
So it was, talking to my wife about this recently, and we've got a home next to us that has renters in it. We've got actually 2 homes in a row next to us that have renters in it. And one is definitely more long-term and one is definitely more short-term. And we were having this discussion just about, you know, when you have those long-term renters, you're able to get to know them, especially when you have young kids and they're just roaming around. There's definitely a comfort level that's there of when you get to know these people, and making sure that you're feeling safe instead of having kind of that constant rotation. I go back and forth. So you know, it depends on the minute. I think I lean more towards, look, it's not a question of if you can or can't rent. It's a question of how long is the rental. And if we have people in our community, these homes that are doing it for a longer term, to have more of a status in our community and feel part of the community, I feel more comfortable that way. But again, when you talk to those people that really have compelling reasons, one thing that I would ask as you go throughout this process is I would love for some options. I think community input is super helpful, but I would like to go to my residents and say, this is what we're looking at to tackle this issue. Some of the options are, let's make it legal, you know, wherever people can comply, they get a license, whatever it might be. Let's make it dedicated to just certain zones, or let's make it where there's only long-term rentals, you know. I'd love to go, I guess that's not a real option because there are some.
We're actually not talking about whole home rentals. That, to me, that's not even on the table in single family neighborhoods.
No, I understand,
So
I understand.
So if you're owner occupied, you actually can know your neighbor, they're renting.
But I guess
it ain't
more
internal ADU.
short-term or long-term, right?
No, I don't see that. It's, if you are owner occupied, you are long-term resident. And
I'm
you
talking
are
about their rental,
renting
their
for a
renter.
short-term internal
That's
ADU.
correct.
Yeah,
That's
so when you
That's
say that they're not gonna build, you're not gonna know your neighbor, you actually are gonna know your neighbor.
Sorry, what I meant was the person renting.
Okay.
But my point is, I'd love to just have that conversation with people instead of, because sometimes when I say, what are your thoughts about short-term rentals? It just leads me down a path that is just wide open. And I'd love to say, this is how we're thinking of approaching this. Give me some feedback.
Absolutely.
So I hope you guys can come back with some of those suggestions and then I can at least make a decision on.
Well, we can
a
do
couple
interim
items.
reports during a council meeting. This is what we've discovered. This is where we're leaning. What do you think? And then I do want to go back to the objectives. So I'm just pleading with you, you know, that if we can fit it in the next agenda, that we come back and you look at that Veronica's paper and go, I'm comfortable with this. I'm not comfortable with this, and give us a direction to go.
I think the objectives are hard because there's the property rights. And then there's the, where does it start? Where does it end? And we have that discussion. I feel like that's the majority of our time that we have here.
Yeah.
It's around that. And that's why I think it's so hard to say the objective is X.
Read the paper.
That's tough.
I think you will be persuaded that there are some objectives that we can agree on that should guide our policy. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think my
It's an easy
biggest
read.
concern are those property rights. How much are we gonna regulate people in their homes?
Yeah.
That's what's tough.
And then looking at the economy and where we're going with the economy is.
Yeah.
We have to take that into consideration.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to discuss and for being willing to take this on so that we can do something hopefully by the spring.
Thank you all. Great discussion. So let's move on to item C under staff reports, which is a town center discussion. And this will probably be maybe more brief than we thought, but I just thought we'd give an update. We, as of today, Jared did a looked at the county vote, and I think the bond measure is leading by just over 700 votes. At this point, we do not see a fairly, you know, any real possibility of that changing. However, it still can, And so the county will be done counting by the 15th. Is that the right date we have, Jared?
So we'll do the canvas on the 19th, so next Tuesday, so that'll be the official.
Right. I think the county will be done on the 15th is what I had heard. And then by the 19th we would we would do the canvas. So so we thought that we would just bring this as an item to discuss fairly quickly about next steps of where we go. We just talked about what will happen with the official vote, but then I'll let Jared further expand a little bit after that. So.
Yeah, so in anticipation and preparation, we've been working actually on an RFP to put out for a development partner. Mike's been working on that with our consultant. I think we're sending back the first draft day into this week, probably to them to make some corrections. But the intent is to put that out hopefully by December
1st, yeah.
and then leave it open for a month and a half or so, from mid to end of January, to give people time to put something together and respond to the big deal.
So when will we get to review the RFP?
We'll send some comments back and then.
No, I mean to see the request for proposal. Sorry,
Before
the
it's
request, the request.
You want
Oh, I thought you're saying you're gonna send it out and be getting replies in December.
Yeah, so our intent is to post it at the beginning of December and keep it open for until the mid or end of January. And let bids come in from that. Are you asking?
Yeah, I'm asking to see what is gonna be put out into the
For the
community.
proposal,
Uh-huh.
so we can bring that. We can send it out for review.
Sure, yeah.
That would be great. I'd love to see it before it's actually posted.
I don't think it actually has to be voted on or anything, so we can send it out for review and see if there's comments or suggestions. We have been working with a consultant as well on the, what do you want to call it, Mike, the relocation or the lease agreements that are in there currently.
Yeah, property transactions.
Transactions that are ongoing, and so they're helping us work through those. Some of those we don't really want to discuss because does have to do with property transactions, so we want to discuss that. We'll probably have a closed session here in the next couple of meetings to discuss those that are ongoing. And then we have been working with and trying to get some feedback from developers on different things and ways that we should approach this as well, since we recognize we are not property developers, so we're trying to find the best ways and methods forward through this.
So are we going to be getting from these developers the kind of reports such as, their financial and, studies and risk assessments as to, what kind of venture could be financially viable? I guess what I'm getting at is that since, approximately, 47% of voters in our city expressed opposition to this bond and brought forth various concerns that they had. And since we represent all the people of the city, I would like to know what steps we can and will take in our due diligence before we make the decision to advance the bond, and how, given developers are putting out this RFP, whether we're asking, whether these providers would actually build into their analysis, the kind of metrics that a number of citizens were interested in seeing. Again, before we as a council would make a final decision to, generate this bond for $30 million.
So there will be a number of criteria in the RFP will go out. It's kind of up to the bidder as to how much they want to go into that and how much effort they want to put in and money they put in to reach those scores. So I mean, we can't dictate that they have to do an in-depth study, but they will definitely tell us what their strategy is moving forward, how they're going to approach it, what kind of agreements, what kind of partnership this would be. Leaving that open to them to say. That's why we want to leave it open through into January, because we want to give them that time to do the research, to do the analysis that they need to do, and what they need to put together in their bid package. So we can dictate what comes out of that, but I can't dictate how much time, money, and effort they put in.
Bottom line, Councilmember Brown, I think it's a fair question. We, what the city decide, what the recommendation that the city comes up with of which development partner to go with will include enough detail to separate clearly what the city will be doing versus what the development partner will be doing, and there will be enough financial analysis for at least our portion. We're not going to dictate to a private developer to say, have you done this study to think you can get a retailer in here? That would be part of their due diligence in submitting a request for proposal to be our partner to take on their financial risk in the project. But I think it's a fair question, and I think I can confidently say we won't move forward until until the evaluation of all the RFPs come in and that determination is made. So
will they be anticipating being able to utilize the TIF mechanism, the tax increment financing?
Yes. And the TIF that we have talked about as a council and as with staff, and knowing what taxing entities are willing to do, parking is high on the list, and so we feel confident that would be an area where we could get tax increment from the taxing entities to offset cost, to hide for structured type parking that will allow us to develop a bigger portion of the property. Did I say that correctly, Mike? Anything you want to add?
I would just say at this point, TIF is a tool that's on the table. It's been signaled as a tool that can be used.
Yep.
The exact return from that is unknown until we have kind of a plan in place and some financial projections, and then you take that to the taxing entities.
Yes, I understand that process. The question I have is whether when the developers put their bids forward, whether they will in their financial analysis say, it will be necessary for us to use TIF, and this is how we can make this a financially viable. I guess, coming from District 4, where, the Canyon Center has been an example of a project that was based on TIF that was not able to deliver to the public what they were anticipating, which was to have a city park built on any kind of timely basis. I mean, I think that's been under construction now for 10 years. So I think a level of specificity to assuage or to make this a viable, since the park is a big piece of our plan. And anyways, I'm very interested in reading the RFP and seeing how we're framing this as we put this out into the community, because I think it's going to be important to make this as thoughtfully and robustly evaluated as possible as we, take our steps toward an ultimate decision on the GEO bond.
That's good feedback as we work on the RFP too.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
The only other thing that I think I would add as far as next steps are our public finance partner, Zions Bank, is working on, and I don't know if you want to add anything to this, Scott, but working on the issues of whether or not issuing part of the bond in different stages would be beneficial, and what would be the advantages. So anything you want to add to that, Scott?
I have been in contact with Mark Anderson at Zion Public Finance, and he is looking at some guidance on that to look at the dynamic of closing costs that we would incur if we did multiple issues versus a single issue. Some of it is a little bit because we have to clearly define the taxable versus untaxable aspect of the bond. So some of it is a little bit driven on what the ultimate development kind of looks like, to make sure that our original estimate of 60% Tax exempt and 40% taxable remains, strong and consistent there. And so we're working through some of that. There's also spend down requirements on the bond. So in order to avoid having to pay back arbitrage, which is when we earn interest above and beyond what the taxable rate on, or the interest rate on the bond is, and everything. So there's a few things we're working out to get better information on. So we're going in with our eyes fully opened into the process on that. And we should have that back, I would say, in a week or so here, and be able to have some better information.
Right. Any other questions, comments from the council? Okay, we'll move on to our last agended item within staff reports, which is item E, the budget retreat discussion. So Jared and I have been talking a little bit about how maybe to create a little bit more efficiency in some of the ways that we're going to do or how we would like to see the retreat happen and progress. And so I'm going to turn the time over to Jared to let him give some of his thoughts, and we'll talk about it as a council.
Okay, thanks. First off, I want to set the date if we can. I know originally we talked about doing it on the 14th, which is a Tuesday during the day, and just do a full day. Had a request to move that to the 16th. I heard back from a few of you, but I just wanted to make sure we did that wasn't a conflict or an issue on January 16th.
It's a Thursday.
It should be a Thursday.
I'm okay with that.
So far, so good.
I'm great with that day.
Sooner it's on the calendar, the better.
What time are we doing again?
We would do it probably 8 to 5, or 8 to whenever. And we're looking at maybe doing it off site so we get out of here. Not too far off site. But not be stuck in this room. So are you good with the 16th?
You guys are great
You can come to my house.
great snacks.
So we'll plan on the 16th, starting around 8:39. That'll make you get up real early.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
16th.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, as the mayor mentioned, we've been talking about ways trying to strategize so that we can use this time and not give everybody a headache by noon. So what I'm asking of the department heads is to give me their budget requests before then as well. They don't have to be totally fleshed out, but we want an idea of what we're looking at. And I'd like to ask the same of you all. What I'd like to do there is kind of set it up how we do the agenda items, and I guess how they do bills as well. We can have 2 sponsors on an item. It would be great. That way we make sure there's some interest in talking about it, and that we're not burning that time. So I'll get a form together that's fairly easy to fill out if y'all wouldn't mind putting that together, and then we can kind of schedule things out and strategize a little bit about how we're going to use our time there.
Sounds good.
Can I request, and actually Councilmember Burrell had brought this up, that we see what last year's priorities were and the progress
I
before
do
we.
have an update for that. I need to set
Okay.
that.
Okay.
I did talk about that with all the departments, and we did put together an update. I just haven't filled it out and sent it out to you.
Because
right now it's on my
pretty
checklist,
typical that
right?
things that probably haven't risen to the surface probably
Right.
weren't as prioritized as we should have, or maybe there's gonna drop off. But I definitely would like to be able to revisit that before.
Yeah, and those are things too. I think if we're not moving or we're not close on those, we want to talk about that and see if there's still a priority.
Yes.
My ultimate goal is to get you into a 5-year strategic plan that can obviously change and alternate, and as things change priorities, we can move that, but at least there's a vision kind of going forward. But
It'd be great if I
know
can
that
create a
right.
5-year plan at the end of when I'm here for the next 5 years.
Well, another thing I'd love to see us, from the staff, would be to put together a process that, and you're already working on that, and I like this, idea of a form that we'll be, giving back to you related to our priorities. Oh, I have a sneeze coming on, sorry.
Look at the light, look at the light.
That's what you do, look at
Yep,
the light.
look at the light.
Doesn't that make you sneeze?
Not me. I'm
Oh,
not.
that stops it. Okay, I'm looking at the light. That, in the, weeks following, the retreat, that you set some kind of expectation for us on when, because inevitably the discussions, what does get confirmed by the council needs to be looked at, you know, from a fiscal perspective. But it would be great, I'd like to see a process whereby those who have put agenda items in the retreat, that they, well, we all get feedback, but those council members who have specific agenda items, an example would be Councilmember Highland and the short-term rentals, that that the staff, whatever staff members are assigned to any given project, that they interact immediately on the front side of advancing any of these projects, and that they allow some level of input from the collaboration from the council member. I think it could be very advantageous to do that, you know, for the similar reasons I brought up earlier about having citizens on the STR committee. It would have a similar, I think, good outcome to have the council member again that's advancing any given initiative to be collaborative with staff to get it launched. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, to make sure we're going in the right direction.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah, that'd be.
pointing the right
yeah.
way.
Yeah, so I just, again,
Yeah,
the
and
more
that's-
that we can have process that is, you know, clear, transparent and accountable, I think we'll be advancing.
So it's a matter of finding the right system to do that with.
Yeah.
In the process, like you said, so we're looking at that,
Right.
sure. That's really all I've got right now. There's no big plans. We'll feed you too.
Great.
I'll
That's
be
gonna be
there.
really important because when the blood sugar goes low. Yeah. We're gonna need
Yeah, I'll
some-
tell you, I was at a conference at that aquarium out there, and literally to have the aquarium behind or beside you. Is
Yes.
that
You
ever?
have
Oh, I
sharks in the
could've-
water and
Yes.
you're meeting.
And it was lovely, and it
Might
made
be a
you,
little out of the budget, but we'll.
okay, it might be out of the budget.
I've been to a conference over there. so-
Isn't that something? I feel like I could have been in that meeting
I think we
room
should
all
have
day
it at
long.
McDonald's. Okay, we got one.
Just no quarter.
Williams.
Now that kind of food is what gives you migraine headaches.
I know, that's true.
I would love to see a 5-year strategic plan
Me
and
too.
all of our retreat priorities tied to that strategic plan. I think it's important to know why we're doing what we're doing. Everything we should tie back to master plan.
So one of my
Where are we
budget
going?
requests may be a budget for strategic plans.
Okay.
Just be aware.
Right.
Well, if it's 5 years, I like what you said about having flexibility, because generally, 5-year plan,
Oh, it doesn't
It's-
last past the first.
no, it's just, it goes out the window pretty quick.
We could do 3.
Married that long.
Yeah, so that, I like 3 because it still allows you that
Yeah.
flexibility. But you can add some wins in there before you end up having too many losses. That's true.
Well, how far out do we do our budgets? 3 to 5 years?
There is a 5-year, plan, but again, it's projections and it's pretty far
Well,
out.
we know that financial projections, actually, anything past 18 months is pointless,
Right.
but you still have your 5 years, so you know, okay, at least this is the trajectory.
You
This
should put
is
the really
kind of-
broad goals out 5 years.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Fully
we'll look
appreciate
at it. I've been talking with some firms and trying to see what. Yeah, that's
Well,
all.
hey, great. Thank you, Jared. And thank you, everybody. I thought that was productive. Thanks for your input on that item. So let me just do real quick now, move on to item number 4, which is a review of calendars and upcoming events. So the first item is so our next council meeting, which will be November 19th, starting at 4, we'll be back on a regular schedule. The Light to Heights will be on December 2nd from 5 p.m. until 7:30, and that's at the City Hall Collimore Room. And then the Arts Council Holiday Show, Friday, December 6th at Butler Middle School from 7 to 8:30. Hopefully we can all try to be there. I think that's a new thing that the Arts Council is doing, and we're excited to support them in that. So that is the last item, and we do, like I said, we don't have a closed meeting this week. We'll push that to the next meeting and spend some time with an issue that we need to discuss. But at this point, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn our city council work session.
Mayor, may I just make one comment about the calendaring?
Sure.
so for 2025, I'm just asking, I know it's the year that we're gonna celebrate the 20th anniversary of the city's incorporation. Has a date been set yet for that?
Sorry, we've talked about a little bit of staff and we thought it'd be appropriate and with the historic committee who's no longer here to do something larger at Butlerville Days and then to do smaller things throughout the year. We don't have a huge budget for it, but just recognize and at each event and every opportunity we have, we'll bring this up. We're looking at maybe creating a logo or something as well. Just to kind of put that in people.
But I do foresee as well a date that we will have a main singular celebration, Councilmember Burrell, along with multiple other things that
Yeah,
they're
I just
talking
wanna-
about throughout the year. Yeah,
I'm
and
sure,
I
like-
agree, we want it sooner than later. Yep,
Yeah,
I agree.
I just want to protect that in my 2025 calendar.
What was
Okay.
the actual date?
January 14th.
Oh, see, we should have done the retreat on the 14th. How appropriate.
That would have been great.
So
Yeah.
we'll look at, yeah.
Okay.
And I can report that the Butlerville Days Committee has talked about it and really does want to make it a central focus.
And it is on our agenda next, in the first meeting in December to talk about it during the work session.
And then last thing, I want to thank Councilmember Newell, who will act as mayor pro tempore during the business meeting this evening. And so at this time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn our work session.
And to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.